This week, a political showdown in Texas over district maps. Our panel weighs in. The size and scope of the Russia hoax continues to grow. And a St. Louis soccer fan, did he get tossed out of the event for wearing a MAGA hat? These stories and much more straight ahead on The Lion Week in Review. Welcome into this week's edition of The Lion Week in Review. It's a weekly look at the culture, the courts, your state capital, and your kids. I'm Chris Stigall. Now, let's meet the gentlemen on the panel. Some of the voices, thoughts, stories at readline.com. The authors are with us today. Josh Mann, managing editor. Michael Ryan, executive editor. And Adam Wittenberg, one of our staff reporters here at The Lion. All right, fellas, let's dive right in. An interesting story, Michael. And because Michael does kind of two hats here at the Herzog Foundation, in addition to his work at The Lion, you've also got a great publication you contribute to called The Heartlander. And you have a story, an interesting story about a soccer match in St. Louis went awry for one fan.
Yes, indeed, it did. It was one fan only. Season ticket holder named Michael Weitzel. He was booted from a St. Louis City Soccer Club match July 26th for having Make America Great Again hat on. There were no politics, allegedly, in the stadium. And somebody was triggered by that, thinking the MAGA hat was political. And so he pointed out, and others pointed out, after he videoed himself being what he called evicted from the stadium, that there were all sorts of LGBTQ flags and images, not only in the stadium, but associated with the soccer club. So how is one political and the other isn't? What is political? What isn't political? A lot of people think the U.S. flag might be political, so is that going to be evicted? And this story has gotten the attention of international news, but also the U.S. Department of Justice, who's looking at whether his rights were violated.
You know, I remember a few years ago, maybe 2 or 3 years ago, it was a Ukrainian flag or an Israeli flag that someone dropped at an Eagles game over the side for a minute, and they were escorted out of the stadium. I mean, Adam, I don't know. I guess if it's universal policy that there are no displays, that's one thing. Hats or things people are wearing, that might be more difficult to police anyway.
Yeah, and a couple things to point out here. I mean, the hat was red, which is the color of the team. So he was wearing a red shirt. He happened to be wearing a red hat. It simply said, "Make America Great Again." It didn't say Trump, or, I mean, we know that's a Trump slogan, but it didn't strike me as overtly political. And then, like Michael alluded to, the soccer team, I think it was 2022, posted, like, we want to be the most inclusive team, and soccer's for everyone, and they're having all these pride flags and rainbow flags and all this kind of stuff. So it's complete discrimination that is allowed and even endorsed by the team, but you wearing a very personal item on your body with a very, low-level political statement is inflammatory, and because of one complaint, he was literally taken out of the stadium.
And I'm trying to remember, I don't follow soccer, but Josh, didn't Trump just recently show up at the World Cup? I mean, he seems to be injected in just about every cultural event out there these days. Is it even gauche to show up in a MAGA hat anymore? I thought we've kind of gotten past all this.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that's interesting to me about the story, the kind of bigger picture, is that if you're going to try to enforce speech restrictions, it's going to come with a whole host of real-world difficulties. And what seems unfair here is that the team is approving some political speech, and that what their line is, well, we've pre-approved some of this other stuff, but not this guy. The other thing that I want to point out is I thought the interaction was exemplary. He did protest. He did film himself. Even the interaction with the police officer was respectful. The police officer himself said, "Hey, I'm a Trump guy," and seemed to really be claiming at least that, "Hey, I'm just doing my job. I'm following the rules." And I thought when we see a lot of public police-citizen interactions, I thought this one was kind of exemplary and maybe in kind of an undercurrent to the story.
Yeah, Michael, it kind of makes you wonder if President Trump wanted to go visit that soccer team himself, would he be welcome?
Well, you do have to wonder, but I think he'd be welcomed by most of the fans.
Yeah.
He's very popular in Missouri.
That's at the Heartlander, if you care to read more on that story. Great job on that from Michael. Let's go to Adam over at readline.com. Oklahoma continues to be an interesting state when we talk about education. There's been a great battle about school choice, different leaders inside Oklahoma, how they govern Oklahoma schools. You've got another one about it.
Yes, well, the state superintendent of education, Ryan Walters, is very bullish on promoting America First values, conservative principles, trying to even integrate the Bible, the Ten Commandments, and because he says they're part of America's foundation. His latest move is he's working with PragerU to come up with a test because teachers are moving to the state, and some of them are coming from New York, California, Illinois, these blue states. And he says if you're coming here from a blue state, before you can teach, you have to pass a basic, kind of like a civics test, an America First test. Do you know what the Constitution is? I would wonder if they have questions like, do you know that we're a constitutional republic or democratic republic, not a democracy, like they say? And questions like, can you distinguish a boy from a girl? Do you know what that is? Because he doesn't want the woke getting in to Oklahoma.
You know, I have to say, Josh, we either talked about this or you wrote about it at the Lion this week, I believe, and that's that grisly murder of that couple in Devil's Den, the state park in Arkansas. That was a guy that hopped from district to district, state to state as a public school teacher.
That's right. In fact, he was at least 2 schools in Oklahoma before jumping to Arkansas. Teacher certification is a huge issue, and I think it's wise. They've created a lot of incentives for new teachers to come into the state, and so it seems eminently wise to say, with this influx of teachers from other places, we need to make sure that they align with Oklahoma values. The only thing that I wonder about a little bit is, can these kinds of things be done more discreetly? I think partly, sometimes there's some political points to be scored as well. But I think I could see a test for everybody. I mean, let's make sure even people from other states who were trained in liberal universities also agree.
My 19-year-old son, Michael, came home the other day. He works part-time while he's going to school, and he said, "Dad, did you know I could substitute teach?" And he was kind of almost laughing as he said, "It sounds like they'll take anybody." That's a problem, isn't it?
Well, it kind of is. But in terms of what they're trying to do in Oklahoma, the schools have every right and every reason to make sure that they keep leftist ideologies, indoctrination out of the classroom, be it racial, sexual, or political indoctrination. I think Josh was alluding to this. They might want to just administer the test to all, the America First test, to all new hires in the district. I love what the state superintendent said, though. If you're a teacher coming to Oklahoma from woke states, you will not be indoctrinating our kids with a liberal agenda. Oklahoma welcomes you, but first tell me the difference between a boy and a girl. It's pretty basic.
Michael, while we have you, you're also working on another project over at the Heartlander, which I wanted to call people's attention to. And it's sort of a bigger opinion piece on what some refer to as the Russia collusion hoax, or Obamagate, some call it. There have been more, and we're going to talk about this a little later in the show, more allegations leveled by the current DNI, Tulsi Gabbard. But you said this kind of permeates the American psyche.
Yeah, I mean, the Russia hoax documents that have been released so far basically show that it all comes down to Barack Obama and Hillary Clinton's twin malevolent schemes to hijack the Republic and to frame a political rival as a Russian asset, all to maintain power, to get Hillary elected, to save Obama's legacy. And besides being the biggest scandal in U.S. political history, which it is, it's also divided American society. It's pitted friend versus friend, neighbor versus neighbor. It's widened the war between the political parties. It's turned the federal government, weaponized it against half the population. It's inspired maybe some assassination desires or attempts. And you just look at the venom toward MAGA online, and what happened in St. Louis with the guy wearing the MAGA hat. One conservative posted on X about the left, "I don't want to live with them. I don't want to coexist with them." That's really sad. Nothing has divided this country more since the Civil War than this has. And you have to wonder, how power mad does somebody have to be to want it this bad to do this much?
And then, Adam, we've talked about it here in the last couple of weeks. I notice as well, not only the division right and left, but there seems to be division even among some who maybe are Trump voters at present. I don't know how big it is, but it's real. I certainly see it online. The division, the chaos, the tumult. Is it purposeful?
Mm-hmm. Yes. The liberal or the extreme left agenda is to create chaos, and out of that foment some sort of revolution with a new strong leader. So as you break down society, as you divide, it's divide and conquer basically. Break down the fabric, divide man from man, families and all these divisions, and as society crumbles, then there is some sort of revolution where someone strong arms and takes power. That is their agenda on the extreme left, and it's something to be wary of.
Another important piece Michael's written at The Heartlander, if you care to check that out. Back to ReadLion.com, and Josh, our colleague Maggie Little there in D.C., talking about President Trump now maybe tackling sanctuary jurisdictions around the country. Many cities have declared themselves sanctuary cities, and I know the Trump administration, specifically Kristi Noem, Tom Homan, they've said they're not going to stop at the borders of these sanctuary cities just because they call themselves that.
That's right. There are a number of jurisdictions in the United States that still declare themselves sanctuary cities, and they are battling the Trump administration on immigration policy. Some of the states, it includes Washington, D.C., but also states like California, Colorado, Minnesota, New York, major cities such as San Francisco, Philadelphia, New York City, Denver, Chicago, and Boston. And basically the Justice Department is saying they're going to do what they can to crack down on these places and try to continue to institute the administration's agenda, which, by the way, seemed to win overwhelmingly in November. Still, most Americans are very much supportive of this administration's attempt to crack down on illegal immigration. What seems not to get reported, really, hardly by anybody, is all of the administration's pro-immigration policies and rhetoric. They are pro-legal immigration, and so those things are important things to keep our eyes on.
Speaking of lawlessness in big cities, you've written an important piece, Adam, that I know many in the faith community have paid close attention to. I've seen a lot of prominent faith leaders on social media talking about the story you've written at ReadLion.com. Yeah,
this is a really horrific story of a church parishioner gunned down on the steps of a Seattle church. And the silence from City Hall is absolutely deafening, because this is the same church that a couple months ago had a worship service in a public park, and the mayor of Seattle criticized them, even encouraged violence. I think Antifa kind of raided the concert and, had to be broken up. And so these politicians are like against this church, and then one of the members is gunned down, and they say nothing, they do nothing. And the pastor said, if this was a shooting outside a mosque, or if this was like racially motivated, every politician from here to there would be out making a statement and organizing a march and a protest. But because a Christian was killed outside a church in a leftist American city, liberal city, there's nothing to say and nothing to be done.
Panel, thank you. Coming up, when we get back, some sights and sounds from cable news this past week. It all seems to be focused on Texas. We'll tell you why next, as the Lion Week in Review rolls on. Welcome back to the Lion Week in Review. We'd like to take a look at the sights and sounds from cable news over the last week. Our panel is back, Adam, Josh, and Michael. Gentlemen, we start with the topic du jour in politics this week, and that's redistricting, potentially, in Texas. Democrats have cut bait and headed to Illinois, where they're hanging out. They don't want to allow Governor Abbott and the legislature in Texas to have a quorum to vote on potential redistricting there, which would give Republicans, they project, some 5 new seats in the House of Representatives. J.B. Pritzker, the governor of Illinois, appeared on the Colbert Show, The Late Show, which has just recently been canceled. And Colbert actually makes a surprising point to Pritzker about Illinois' map. You'll also hear in this montage the reaction this week from Beto O'Rourke and Eric Holder, a couple of Democrats who are saying some pretty strong things about what they believe the Republicans are up to. Take a listen.
Take a look at this. Look at 17 here. It does that, then it comes up here and it sneaks around there and goes all the way up here and then goes right over there like that. And look at this one, kind of goes whoop up there. It's like the stinger on a scorpion down here. Is this common for all states to do?
Well, we handed it over to a kindergarten class and let them decide.
Okay, and that's the nonpartisan group that does this
Absolutely.
For you guys?
That's our independent commission,
If we fail, the consolidation of authoritarian power in America will be nearly unstoppable. That means more masked, plainclothes federal agents without badges or warrants sweeping our fellow Americans up off the streets. It means more retribution and persecution and even violence for Trump's political opponents. And it also means that a Republican majority Congress, with these 5 stolen seats, if we allow them to succeed, will roll out the royal red carpet for a Trump third term.
This is not a Texas problem. Yeah, the focus of this issue is Texas, but this is a national problem. And you got to understand, if somehow, some way, Republicans are able to hold on to the House in next year, and in spite of the fact that I think they should lose because of the big budget bill that took health care away from millions of people, that gave tax breaks to billionaires who didn't need it. If they were somehow able to hold on to the House in 2026, that is the House of Representatives that would have to certify who won the presidential election come 2028, 2029.
And of course, the implication, Michael, from the former Attorney General is that a House controlled by Republicans would somehow cheat the election. I don't know. But anyway, I guess my broad question is, how's this playing out, do you think, with the electorate broadly? Are Americans concerned about what Texas is doing in their legislature, and Democrats calling it the end of democracy as we know it?
I think people are who are tuned into this understand that this has gone on for decades, and certainly in blue states, like Colbert was trying to point out. I don't know what happened to Colbert. If you've lost Colbert as a Democrat, you're in trouble. Is he trying to save his job by being fair all of a sudden? I don't know. But there's in Massachusetts, for example, there are no Republican members of Congress. So this has been going on for a long time, especially in blue states. And as far as sweeping up fellow Americans off the streets, that's a pretty sweeping definition of what an American is.
Adam, I am really shocked at how dramatic Democrats are being. I don't know if they think sincerely this is, if they really believe this, or if this is just a ploy to kind of distract.
Well, they are the fearmongers here. And they have to call anything that Trump does, because he's so effective, their only recourse is to call it authoritarian. But he's just using his rightful authority. Biden did plenty of things using presidential authority that I didn't like or conservatives didn't like, and they didn't scream that he was authoritarian. But because Trump is so effective in what they're doing, and then it's also that classic where they flip. I mean, they say violence to Trump's political opponents, but yet Biden administration spent 4 years doing exactly that to their political opponents, or this issue about stealing elections.
And Josh, in Washington, D.C. specifically, I'll get your reaction to this on the other side. President Trump this week, one of his members of DOJ, got involved in a potential attempted carjacking in Washington, D.C. He sprung into action to protect a woman from her car being stolen. He ends up being beaten savagely, and President Trump this week made some news saying this.
We're going to beautify the city. We're going to make it beautiful. And what a shame. The rate of crime, the rate of muggings, killings, and everything else, we're not going to let it. And that includes bringing in the National Guard, maybe very quickly, too.
So, in one sense, you have Democrats who are shrieking that the end of the world is near with Texas. But in Washington, D.C., it's really pretty savage. And Trump says we're going to have to step in and maybe do something about it.
Yeah, it's a sad story where apparently a number of these are young teenagers, 14, 15, 16 years old, beat this guy up because he tried to intervene in a carjacking. And what opponents are saying, or critics of the crime there are saying, is that these kids know they're just going to get a slap on the wrist. There's not going to be any real consequences. And so we've seen this in cities around the country. We've actually seen people start to elect some tougher on crime prosecutors, I'd say in the last 2 years, because people are sick of it. Certainly in D.C., there needs to be something done. And so there's talk, even Elon Musk calling for the federalization of D.C. in terms of law enforcement. And so we'll have to keep our eye on it. Trump's certainly in favor of it.
I think I speak for many people who voted for Donald Trump anyway. I hear this theme a lot from folks who voted Trump, and the word is consistently accountability, whether it's law breaking in Washington, D.C., or whether it's the story that Michael was talking about earlier with Russiagate. Peter Navarro, one of the president's aides on trade, we know was arrested during the Biden administration simply for refusing to testify before Congress. He was trying to exert his presidential immunity in testifying, said he had a constitutional right to not testify. He was arrested. He spoke in front of the White House to the press about that and accountability this week.
I went to prison, as did Steve Bannon, for defending the Constitution, but there isn't a single person associated with the Russia hoax that's been held accountable. And the list is a long one. It goes Obama, Clinton, FBI Director Comey and other people worked there, like Page and Strzok. It involved the intelligence community and Brennan and Clapper, and the importance of the Durham Annex. The importance of the Durham Annex is that ties it all together and brings also in George Soros and his son Alex and the Open Society Foundation. And this is the most sophisticated political scandal that's ever been engineered. No one's been held accountable. Good for Attorney General Pam Bondi for pursuing that. And the most important thing I can tell you, if people are not held accountable for the Russia hoax, they will do it again.
So, Michael, accountability, that's the word. As you hear Democrats talking about Texas or maybe even Epstein, you have Peter Navarro and others talking about accountability here. What do you know? What do you think?
Well, number one, I think it's important to keep this away from Congress because you're not going to get accountability out of even the Republicans in Congress. There is talk that reports that they're impaneling a grand jury to look at this, and perhaps in Florida, which is a much more amenable venue for justice than New York or Washington, D.C., to look at Comey, Clapper, Brennan, even Hillary Clinton, perhaps. So all indications are that this administration is serious about accountability for these people.
You know, it's interesting you bring up where this grand jury has potentially or will be impaneled. Former FBI agent appeared on MSNBC this week and had this to say about this grand jury perhaps being impaneled in Florida. Listen.
So a grand jury is typically 23 citizens that are brought together. It's a prosecutorial tool, but if they convene it in D.C. district, they might not get the outcome that they want. So it's likely they're going to put it in Florida, which means they're looking for a certain outcome, not where the facts actually drive you. So again, this looks like weaponization. And what it looks like is, he's bringing together an old conspiracy to kind of fig leaf the Epstein conspiracy. So we're bringing President Obama back in. Hillary Clinton, George Soros is mentioned in this again. So it's the old hits coming back, which might drag some of the MAGA base back to their side.
And this brings us right back to what we were talking about a little while ago, Adam. I mean, that's a left-wing guy, clearly, on a left-wing network who's basically making a guy like Peter Navarro, who literally went to jail, out to be some kind of kook fringe nut. And the people who believe what Peter Navarro or what Michael had just said are living a fiction. So what do we do there?
Yeah, it's incredibly sad because this is the narrative that, of course, Obama or Clinton, these people could never be guilty of anything. And, of course, the people in Florida are biased, but he's not pointing out that possibly the people in Washington, D.C., a very liberal city, would give a biased result the other way. So it's very sad to see people like this even being given a national media presence or voice.
And then one of the more striking partnerships, if you want, this week came from Elizabeth Warren, who ran for president once, may want to again, senator from Massachusetts. She joined Zoran Mandani, the considered frontrunner, I guess, for mayor in New York City, and said this.
When someone stands up and says, I will lead this city by making it more affordable, and here are my plans, real plans, plans to deliver on childcare, plans to deliver on housing, plans to deliver, we're going to experiment, we're going to try things on groceries. That is the Democratic message.
Government-run grocery stores is the Democratic message, Josh. That's what Senator Warren just said.
Yeah, I don't know what's going on with the Democratic Party, but they seem to be taking seriously this prospect of getting some of the older hands in, promoting some of these much further left folks. And, I think Americans need to watch for this. I think a lot of us have felt that socialism didn't really have a good chance, that most Americans would be sensible. But this is a guy who has been out and loud and proud about his socialist, past, and has socialist policies, and now he's got kind of a mainline Democrat who has been radical in some ways, but she's there standing next to him, basically applauding.
Michael, is there an inroad here for this kind of thing, which once, as Josh said, was considered fringe? But I've heard people say that there are so many disenfranchised folks in the country, they may just find themselves frustrated enough to buy in.
Well, and a good percentage of the people in New York, I've heard, I think 40% or more, are foreign-born. So they may not have had the kind of upbringing and indoctrination into the United States and capitalism that most of us have had. The other thing is, we've tried government-run grocery stores in Kansas City, and we're finding out that it's a black hole for spending, and it's not serving consumers well, and it's certainly not serving taxpayers well at all.
Adam, any final thoughts?
Yeah, definitely. Socialism doesn't work. A lot of those foreign-born people came here from socialist countries, but it is sad as the government, and a lot of this took root under Obama, is trying to make people more dependent and posing the government as the hero. People are more inclined to go for this kind of stuff, and it just is not good for the country.
That puts the wraps on another busy week. Panel, thank you. When we return here at the Herzog Foundation and the Lion, we celebrate faith and freedom. America's 250th birthday is coming up next year, and we're celebrating all year. We have our next installment coming up right after the break here as the Lion Week in Review rolls on.
From day one, education in America was inseparable from faith. The earliest settlers believed that teaching children to read was essential, not just for their future careers, but for their eternal souls. That legacy shaped everything that followed.
From the earliest days of settlement in colonial America, the task of educating the community's youth was one of utmost importance. The early Puritan settlers in New England were religious refugees from the British Isles. They left everything in the Old World and traveled thousands of miles across the Atlantic Ocean to plant themselves in the wilderness along the rugged coast of North America.
On November 11th, 1620, even before the Pilgrim separatists left the miserable confines of their ship, the Mayflower, they signed a document with the non-separatists on board, known as the Mayflower Compact. In it, they pledged to solemnly and mutually, in the presence of God and one another, covenant and combine ourselves together into a civil body politic. This agreement not only laid out how civil law would be crafted, but also helped define how their society would be formed. Education was a critical step in providing for the future and in preserving their religious values.
A decade later, John Winthrop, in his City on a Hill sermon, proclaimed that we must delight in each other, make others' conditions our own, rejoice together, mourn together, labor and suffer together, always having before our eyes our commission and community in the work as members of the same body. In so doing, he bound the civil lives of his followers together with their spiritual lives. His charge to make others' conditions our own inherently included education of their young people.
Aside from these lofty speeches that have stood the test of time, there were very practical reasons why the earliest schools were Christian. Education was a community duty. Its success was dependent upon the time and effort of those available to teach the youth in each small settlement. And in small settlements, survival came first. That meant that able-bodied men worked the land while mothers raised the families and often became the family's first educators.
With no formal structure and few resources, the family matriarchs did what they could to instruct their students using a system of rote memorization as the primary method of teaching. As a result, they resorted to what they knew and could recite to assist in the process. This meant the earliest examples of educational material in the English colonies were comprised of prayers and scriptures, all from Christian teachings. As communities stabilized and survival became more assured, a desire arose for a more structured method of education in each town. Small one-room schools were constructed, and children of all ages were drawn together for instruction. In this system, once again, many of the instructors were women of the towns. But as time passed, a new movement changed the system drastically.
Beginning in 1636, with the establishment of Harvard College, the Puritans prepared students to graduate with theology degrees. The foundation of Yale in 1701 followed suit. The purpose of these institutions was to produce Calvinist clergy to serve the spiritual needs of the growing New England colonies. But the newly ordained ministers found that communities could only support them if they did more than preach and tend to their local flocks. The natural thing for them to take on was the role of schoolmaster.
And in a culture where pastors were also the school teachers, this meant schools became an extension of the church. The very people who preached on Sunday taught on Monday, and what they taught for generations was steeped in Christian tradition.
Massachusetts led the charge in institutionalizing Christian education. In 1647, its colonial government passed what became known as the Old Deluder Satan Act. This law required every town with more than 50 families to provide a teacher to specialize in reading and writing. Larger towns were required to support a school to prepare students for a higher education. But it wasn't just about literacy. It was spiritual warfare. The law declared that Satan's goal was to keep men from the knowledge of ye scriptures.
Let that sink in. The purpose of education was to equip children, young people, with the Word of God. From the beginning, American education unapologetically used Christian scriptures as its foundation.
The other factor leading to Christian teaching in early American life was simply one of limited resources. Printed books were extremely rare commodities in the colonies. The most used book in somewhat plentiful supply was the Holy Bible. The clergy teachers provided real-life lessons from familiar Old and New Testament stories. In this manner, they produced a continuous, consistent cycle of instruction in reading, writing, and arithmetic alongside salvation. As New England children advanced in their education, they also learned the connection between their eternal reward and the snares of sin.
As the 18th century approached, a revolution in school texts occurred. Sometime before 1690, Benjamin Harris, a recent immigrant to the English colonies who was living in Boston, published the first edition of the New England Primer. This book became the primary textbook for English colonial America. Rooted in biblical teachings and lessons, over 6 million copies were printed between 1690 and 1830. For at least 140 years, American students used the primer alongside the Bible as the foundation of their education. Borrowing heavily from sacred Christian texts, the primer was responsible for disseminating consistent and memorable prose based in Christian philosophy among generations of Americans. Even today, some of the lessons of the primer are known throughout American society. Among these are In Adam's Fall, We Sinned All, and the still popular children's prayer, Now I lay me down to sleep, I pray thee, Lord, my soul to keep. If I die before I wake, I pray thee, Lord, my soul to take. Lessons such as these shaped the hearts and minds of generations of colonial Americans. In early America, to be educated was to be formed, not just in intellect, but in spirit.